Good morning. Happy Africa Day. This is a start of a series of courageous conversations where we are unleashing Good morning. The Simbas. Happy Africa Day. This is a start of a series of courageous conversations where we are unleashing the Simbas. Okay, so okay, so let me let me sort out. I'm muting my leave it. I'm muting my YouTube thing because it was doing a reflection. So with that technical glitch out of the way, I need to connect it still. Okay, great. Now, so that feedback is now gone. So today's topic is really an auspicious topic because it helps us to use a different lens on evaluating the political situation around the country because it affects, politics do affect business, do affect the emergence of Simbas. And therefore, it was important then to be able to kick off this journey towards COP26 in November in Glasgow, where the Simbas are going to really be presenting what they are doing in relation to climate change, what they're doing in relation to economic growth and economic transformation, and be able to showcase their different projects, their different modules that they would be working on. So for those that know The Lion King, you're going to be so bored to hear it for the umpteenth time because I always use The Lion King to give the contextual background. But what is important today is that you need to look at The Lion King from the three levels. So there's the entertainment level, which is the surface level, and that is what we know and experience normally with The Lion King. And then there's the mental interpretation, which is what I'm going to show you. But there's a spiritual interpretation that I will ask you at the end of this webinar to be able to now apply, having given you the tools that are showing you how we can be able to utilize this. So I know some of you might know this already, but it never hurts to actually hear the story of Simba again, because Simba, the Lion King, is really the metaphor of the journey that we are actually taking. And so I will use this presentation that says Three Waves of an African Leadership, because this was how Dr. Hage Geingob explains the leadership in Africa and its institutions. And I use that to show how that is applicable using the Lion King comparison. And so when you look at the Lion King, you have the normal characters being your Mufasa, being Rafiki, being Scar. And so we're quite familiar with these kind of characters. So now the test for you today is to be able to look and say, in South Africa, as we're going through the Lion King age, who are the characters? So I'll start off with the mental interpretation in terms of saying, this is how the story has been told to date. And then after the analysis, where I put the ANC presidents on trial in terms of the dividends that they have delivered for South Africa, then you're going to go back to this Lion King and be able to say, now, given that analysis, has there been a change in your perceptions of the characters? So without any further ado, I will kick off. So we know the Lion King opens up in 1994, whereby in South Africa, we had the new democracy being born on the 27th of April. And with that new democracy, you have leaders like the Mufasas of the era, being the founding fathers of democracy being the likes of Nelson Mandela, Oliver Tambo, Sisulu, Lilian Ngoyi, presenting Simbas to South Africa and saying, we have turned a new leaf and we have brought you political freedom, and Simba will be able to bring you economic freedom because that is his task and his challenge that is being given to him by the elders. And then all the animals comes to pay their homage to Simba. And not everybody is happy because Scar's saying, I could be the king. And now this little upstart comes and takes over my position. And so in South Africa, we had the Mandelas presenting young politicians like Trevor Manuel, like Sidney Mufamadi, like Tito Mboweni as the Simbas, whose task was to be able to give us an economic transition in this new democracy. And so they presented these young people in their 40s. They got cabinet positions and were given big tasks in terms of Department of Labor. And for Tito, for Trevor Manuel, he was given Ministry of Finance. He started, of course, with trade and industry. So this was a very big responsibility on their shoulders. And so when the Lion King moves on, so you find this constant tussle between the nerds and the rent seekers. So we call these the young African lions. This is like Vuyo Jack, who goes, listens to their parents, who's a nerdy type of person, who is respectful, and who on Saturday wakes up, he goes to the library first thing, and then he has piano lessons. After his piano lessons, he goes to the movies. And then when he gets back in Dube Village, people laugh at him. It's like, when you buy this side, you're always going to do the things the right way. And so therefore they don't understand each other because they will call them the hyenas and the young African lions. And there's always that constant tussle. The hyenas want shortcuts to success and money. So therefore they just not about long, arduous journey to success. They don't want to have a lot of skin in the game. So they want the easy way. So what happens? So in The Lion King, you have Scar plotting with the hyenas to take over Pride Rock. And Scar can't do it alone, so he has to be able to have manpower to be able to remove um, Mufasa. So in South Africa, the normal interpretation that we have is that, of course, Jay-Z is the one who is now wanting to have power, and then he would collude with COSATU, with ANC Youth League, and also the South African Communist Party to actually be able to then marshal the forces that can be able to remove the powers that be at the day. And Polokwane happened in 2007, and whereby Jay-Z and his henchmen were able to then topple Mufasa. And of course, Mufasa in this scenario that we are used to is that it represents the Mbeki era, the Mbeki ideal. And you find that Simba is told, Simba, go, don't come back here. This is not your place. And so Polokwane in 2007 happens, and therefore you find that when Scar and the hyenas take over Pride Rock, the Securocrats are able to now be gut the critical institutions that threaten them, and they also take power and identify the levers of power that will enable them to enjoy more fruits. So what happens to Simba? He gets exiled to the world of Pumbaa and Timon. And in the world of Pumbaa and Timon, he gets there as a refuge from his pride rock that he's been ousted from as the prince. And when he gets there, he says, yo, I'm so hungry. I wish I could eat a zebra. And what he's told by Pumbaa and Timon says, no, dude, you're going to have to eat grub here. You got to be a vegetarian. And so Simba has to actually hide his light to fit into the world of Pumbaa and Timon. But over the years, he learns to acclimatize to the world of Pumbaa and Timon, and he is able to also learn a lot of lessons around how to have fun, how to be able to let go, and be able to say, Agna Matata, life is problem free. And you know that beautiful song, Agna Matata, life is problem free. And so, what does it mean for South Africa? So, this is the Simbas, the young African lions, have been really exiled to the corporate world, whereby they have to encounter the likes of Pumbaa, who always say you need to grow at all cost, regardless of the impact on the environment, regardless on the impact on transformation. And Timon is tasked with a approach, who is a brilliant corporate strategist who's actually able to optimize every contribution that is being made in the corporate and say, what is the minimum thing that I got to do to score the maximum point? So that's how Timons in this world actually operate in the corporate world. And so Simba has to fit in within this kind of world where he is forced to hide his light. And it's a system that really doesn't gel very well with him. But because he is seeking refuge from the world of Sky and the hyenas, he has to make do with being in the world of Pumbaa and Timon. So, what happens over the years? Sky is not really interested in governing and delivering value for Pride Rock. So, what you find is that the hyenas don't usually build things from scratch. They always are scavengers and are able to eat what the other lionesses have hunted. And as a result of that, you find that there is no growth in the economy. And Pride Rock experiences famine and drought under Scar rule. And also under Scar rule, you have high corruption and you have low growth rates, you have increased unemployment, you have rating downgrades, you have droughts, you have low financial reserves and high inequality. And so therefore, under SCAR, there is scarcity and there is lack. So what happens when that is the case? You find that the lionesses, they refuse to hunt for Sky and the hyenas because they say there's no more water, there's no more food here. So there's nothing that we can be able to do because there is no nutrients that will keep the animals here. There's nothing that is attracting the animals to be at Pride Rock. So they flee from Pride Rock. And so the hyenas get angry and they go to Scar and they say to Scar, Scar, you now do something with these lionesses and make sure that they go and hunt. We don't care that there's no animals anymore. Make them find a hat trick somehow to be able to do something. Then Scar, in his anger, attacks lionesses who refuse to follow his order. And so what you find in South Africa, you had a situation where those that refused to toe the line got removed from cabinet. And that became a big thing because they were saying now, enough is enough. And then back to the world of Pumbaa and Timon. Pumbaa and Timon are sitting, looking at the stars, and Simba says, up there in the stars are the ancestors whose blood courses through our being. These are the ancestors that are looking after us. These are the ancestors that are giving us their wisdom, imparting their wisdom because they do not have any physical impediments anymore. So therefore, they always whisper to us. And Pumendima says, this dude is crazy. They love it. It was like, dude, those are orbs of light. Those are not ancestors. And ultimately, Simba realizes that nobody gets me. And these guys are never going to get me. And yes, I'm safe. Yes, I'm eating. But I'm not actually thriving. I'm not actually abundant in this world of Pumbaa and Timon. And he feels sad. Then Nala comes to the rescue and he says to Simba, Simba, we need to go back to Pride Rock. And every Simba needs an Nala. Without an Nala, a Simba cannot rule the Pride Rock because there's so much to be done. And therefore, Nala is the practical, realistic, and action-orientated partner for Simba the Dreamer. And then Nala is able to tell Simba, yes, I believe in your dreams. They support Simba in his dreams. They don't believe that he's crazy. They give Simba that affirmation that it's okay. This dream, it might seem impossible right now, but it's doable. And this is what you can actually do to make it come alive. So a Nala is an indispensable part of the journey of a Simba in the journey towards his pride rock. But Simba still needs to confront his inner demons that he hasn't been able to confront since he's been hiding in the world of Pumbaa and Timon. And then Rafiki comes to the rescue as well, and he brings the stick and hits Simba on the head and say, wake up, Simba, you need to find the Mufasa in you, because the Mufasa in you is providing you the foundation. But you gotta be more than a Mufasa, because Mufasa did his job and he's passed the baton to you. And passing this baton to you, you need to now man up, wake up, go back to Pride Rock, go claim your Pride Rock, go claim your birthright. And Simba realizes that to get economic freedom legacy on his shoulders, he needs integrity and he needs authenticity. He needs to experience what it is like to be Simba before he can be able to accept every others. So, which is very akin to this whole notion of Black Lives Matter, vis-a-vis all lives matter. You cannot appreciate all lives matter when you don't appreciate your authenticity, your own identity of Blackness. And therefore, that's the lesson that Simba gets from Rafiki. And he says, wow. And then he has that aha moment. And in that aha moment, he finds that Mufasa lives in him, and Mufasa provides a foundation, but he is more than a Mufasa. And he is able to feel Mufasa within deep his inner resources, and he can feel the Mufasa ancestors surrounding him as he prepares to go back to Pride Rock to fight with Scar. But he has to ponder, if he goes and fights Scar physically, what's going to happen? Scar and the hyenas are going to obliterate him completely. They're going to outnumber him, and therefore he's not going to be able to actually fight them off, because the sheer numbers of the hyenas is just so much. And then, secondly, he has to decide, is he going to fight Scar mentally? He can't fight Scar mentally because Scar is very experienced in chess, in intelligence. So, and Simba is just a lighty. Then, is he going to be able, the only place that he can fight Scar is spiritually, when he is able to understand the light that's in himself and is enabling that light to shine, because the integrity in what he thinks, what he says, and what he does is there. So there's no corruption to that light. And therefore, as a result of that, he would be able to stand in front of Scar and be able to allow his light to shine. And so when Simba finally gets it, finally gets his burning bush moment, his Moses moment, he then runs to Pride Rock and to claim his rightful place, to claim his throne, to claim the soul of Pride Rock. And as he runs to Pride Rock, Voyo Jack is singing to him in this album that says, you'll never find another here, Simba. You'll never find another here and now. So you heed the call and you go, 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 boy, to get your throne. And so the Simbas can actually find this album. It's a real album. You know, those lessons that the nerdy Vuyo had to go to for piano lessons, to the library, actually paid off in a way as a result. There is this album, and you can actually get it here. You can listen to it on YouTube Music, Spotify, on Apple Music. So go get it and actually meditate on the meaning of these songs, because it's a call to action for the Simbas to get to their Pride Rock. And now, an interesting thing happens. Simba gets to Pride Rock and confronts Scar, and he says to Scar, Scar, leave. And then Scar says, wow, I'm surprised, Simba, to see you. I thought you were dead. And he says, okay, cool. But you know what, Simba? There's some small angular skeletons that we've got to deal with. And every Simba has Smolanyana skeletons that they got to deal with. These Smolanyana skeletons are the things that Simbas do to get by. Simbas do to survive. And as a result, they accumulate these Smolanyana skeletons that gives the scars of this world an ability to control the Simbas, to be able to shut the voices of the Simbas down. And they are able to use the Smolanyana skeletons to be able to keep Simbas in check. So what happens? So Scar says, but actually, Simba, what have I done? What have I done that warrants my removal from power? And I've complied with all your wishes as a collective. And then Scar gets into mode and he says, well, Simba, you killed Mufasa. Mufasa died because of you. And so Scar now is hovering on Simba, pushing him, revealing and spilling all the beans, pushing him to the edge. And he says to him, Simba, you killed Mufasa. How dare you? How could you? You took our most magnificent king. And Simba left at the edge. And then Scar looks at Simba and says, ooh, I've got you now, my boy. This face looks very familiar. It's the face of Mufasa before I killed him. And that's when Scar crossed the line, because Simba said, hell no, you will not mess with my light. And I will not allow anyone to stifle my light. I want my light to shine, and I want to be able to ignite the light of other lionesses in my pride rock, so that that light that I ignite in them is able to take away the darkness, because there is no darkness that can win against our combined light. And when they see this, Simba protecting his inner light, the lionesses go and say to their king, our king is back, and we're going to fight. We're going to allow our lives to accompany his light, because we feel ignited. Our souls are alive. He has come to rescue the souls of Pride Rock, where it was going down, where it was suppressed. And then that light becomes blinding to Scar. And as it becomes blinding to Scar, Scar is trapped in the corner. And ultimately, they said, Scar, you're our uncle. So please, just leave. We're lovers, we're not fighters. But don't mess with our light, because we're going to fight. So, but we love peace. We're warriors of love, warriors of light. Scar being given the chance, he never takes it, because he's never accountable. And in the end, he says, no, it wasn't me. It was the hyenas. It was the hyenas that made me do this. It was the hyenas that forced me to take over. And then the hyenas turn on Scar and says, okay, well, if we did it, we're going to then take you out. And then ultimately, Scar is taken out. And Simba takes his rightful place at the Pride Rock, with Nala beside him, with the spiritual support of the Rafiki, with his friends, Pumbaa and Timon. But you see, his friends don't control him. His friends are there to support him. His friends are singing to his tune. So that's the end of The Lion King. In South Africa, we haven't gotten to that end. So I leave it up to you to analyze, because we're going to come back to this question at the end of the day and be able to ask ourselves, who is who in the characters? Because there's a trick to this. There's a trick, because when you now go delve deeper at the spiritual element, what I just relayed might actually have a very different meaning. So Simba takes his place in Pride Rock. So today, I mean, I have to tell you, where are the Simbas in South Africa, in Namibia? Where are the Simbas in the different Pride Rocks that we can be able to see bringing that abundance? So I'll tell you, I am a Simba of economic transformation in South Africa, where I have been able to work on creating external transformation tools, been given the platform to do so. And we have been able to a certain extent succeed in making those tools to be used to generate value for the Black Simbas. But where are the Black Simbas? We are now 26 years into democracy, 27 years actually into democracy. And where are the Simbas of banking? Where are the Simbas in manufacturing? Where are the Simbas in insurance? Where are the Simbas? And this is where it gets tricky because the Simbas are there, but the Simbas are hiding. And I'm in the process of writing a book. It's called Clever Blacks Are, I can't say it because it's like effed, F, yeah, screwed. But you know, it's a F word. And why are they screwed? Because politically, they don't really have a very comfortable place politically around South Africa, where they have the shoe that really fits them and that accept them for who they are. Secondly, when they work professionally, either in government or in the private sector, there's always a limit where they can reach. And then when they work entrepreneurially, they also have a limit. So in essence, Simba is hiding and Simba is in a financially fragile situation, like this lady in this beautiful depiction of Elisa Iannaconi's spiral of that. And there are people looking after them to say, if you get out of here, we're going to devour you. So you better know your place here. And therefore, the financially fragile situation keeps Simba caged. And so, what is going to rescue Simba? So, I will stop there with the Simba story, and we're going to revisit it at the end. And so, and get to the core of this trial, where we put the ANC presidents on trial to say, what have you done to rescue the Simbas that are in this situation? What have your policies produced to enable these Simbas to create their pride rocks? So you are hereby put on the stand, ANC presidents. And by ANC presidents, we mean President one, Mandela, two, President Mbeki, and President Zuma. So we can't really evaluate President Ramaphosa because he's still in the middle of his term. So we're really going to have the hindsight of the performance of these other presidents who we do have the data to actually be able to evaluate. So I'm going to stop the share and get on to the new presentation, whereby we are able to now explore what have the ANC president of the past been able to deliver. And we're going to use a reality-based politics tool. And so, but before I continue, I just need to explain why I'm wearing this, because this actually was a gift from Isilo Samabandla the last time I met him in 2015. And we had a beautiful engagement where he told the story of Isandlwana, and he was able to also reveal the mystical meaning of the victory in Isandlwana. That forced me to write, because I was so inspired, to write a song. And that song was Ngehlelo Thini, Ngehlelo Thini, which I haven't released. And this was his gift to me. So on Africa Day, I thought, actually, it's quite important to be able to pay homage to Isilo. But also, why is it important? Because now, on the one hand, I'm a symbol of economic transformation, but I'm also now taking the role of a Rafiki, because I am now taking upon myself to be able to then also use inner tools of transformation. And these tools of inner transformations are what are going to propel the Simbas to wake up from their slumber and be prepared to take over their pride rock and be able to claim their kingdoms. And therefore, this reality-based approach cuts through the gumf, it cuts through opinions. It says, let's look at the data. What does the data tell us? So therefore, I today am taking my role as a Rafiki because Bishop Tutu was our Rafiki in South Africa. And recently he's been able to say, he's been saying to us, I'm passing the baton to you young people to be able to now engage with integrity in the issues of the day. And so on Africa Today, there is that symbolical passing of the baton from the Rafiki of the Mandela age to the Rafiki of today, which I claim that stand of being a Rafiki of today. And this is why, therefore, when I take through this reality-based politics, it's based on just factual and be able to look at things from a 360-degree level. And without any further ado, so let's look at it. So in the VJQ Foundation, which is the base where I'm at, saying we are declaring this decade of 2020 to 2030 as a decade of transforming scarcity into abundance and being able to see Simbas building beautiful pride rocks that range across sectors, that is full of life, full of social cohesion, full of love. And so that's the aim. And to do that, sometimes we have to confront the truth without any emotions and just confront the facts in a very dispassionate way. So let's see. The framework that I'm going to take you then through today is that we have to look at the dilemma that is facing South Africa. What is the dilemma that is facing Simbas? Every generation has their dilemma to resolve. And so the dilemma that we have is that most people do not have claim to struggle credentials because they were not really involved in bringing down apartheid. So as a result of that, the question is with the young Black professionals, the young Black entrepreneurs, what are your credentials in this day and age? And that creates a credential struggle for them because they haven't really risen to resolve that credential struggle that they find themselves in. And therefore, we're going to help to actually identify those credentials that they can actually be able to claim as their own and be able to then see what did the presidents of the ANC provide us with in terms of the foundation to be able to resolve the credential struggle that we currently face as young Black professionals and young Black entrepreneurs. So just to give you a sense, when the Native Land Act was passed in 1913, but the ANC was formed in 1912 as a result of being able to collect the voices of people to protest against the Native Land Act. And so this followed a very gentlemanly approach and said, yeah, we'll have delegations to go deal with things. Until 1944, the young people said, hang on, this is not working. So we need to actually amp up the pace and be able to actually get more creative in how we actually get rid of these racial segregation policy. That's why 1944, on 10th September 1944, the ANC Youth League was founded. And that led to also, and now a greater movement of people to be able to come together, the Congress of the People in Kliptown, and saying this is the collective voice. And what's beautiful about this, they don't want apartheid, but they were also able to define the future that they want. So they said, we want freedom from state oppression and exploitation, but we are able to craft a vision that we can be able to rally behind, Black and white. And that is why this was the original constitution of the People's Freedom Charter. It is the most sacred political document because it is informed by the will of the people. And that is why even today, these words that were contained in the Freedom Charter still ring true, and they still are relevant, and they still provide a spiritual foundation to be able to work towards in the politics of the country. So there's a very beautiful moment. And then, of course, in 1956, we had the Women March, because the women also needed to have a voice heard, and they were able to then make sure that they could march to the union buildings and claim their rightful place in the structure of society. And then in 1961, due to the slow pace of peaceful resistance, whereby, yeah, we've tried all other means, now we need to go get really revolutionary, then Umkhonto weSizwe was formed. And then in 1976, the youth, when they were forced to have Afrikaans as a medium of instruction, they said, hell no. And therefore, the Soweto uprising was their response credential. And then that led to a series of actions, and ultimately there was a call for democracy when the apartheid government realized that they cannot be able to keep the voice of the Black people stifled forever. So therefore, they relented. In 1994, we had our own democratic elections that involved everybody. And there was a formation of a government of national unity. And then, of course, that was political freedom. But political freedom is not enough. So you need to be able to be accompanied by economic transformation. And therefore, in 2003, there was that legal kind of cementing process that says, now we're going to define transformation. And of course, the young people still had a lot of things that they were not comfortable with, such as the statues of roads. And therefore, the roads must fall, along with the fees must fall, in a call to free education. And therefore, the response credential was fees must fall. And for women all over the world, there was also call for women equality, which resulted in the Me Too campaign. What are we facing today? All these struggles are still relevant, but what has become stuck in terms of our credential struggle is that we have climate change, we have COVID-19, and we still don't have any economic growth to speak about. And therefore, that's the relevant struggles that we're facing today. And what is our response to that? So that's what we're going to be then unpacking. When we put the ANC presidents on trial, and of course, this is also quite momentous, because tomorrow, Jacob Zuma is starting his trial, President Jacob Zuma. And so it's quite coincidental, of course, that we have to do a pre-trial and put him on trial before his trial in Pietermaritzburg. Okay, so we are saying the African green renaissance is young Black professionals that they can be able to utilize to be able to say, I've got my credentials. Now, what is important in building this credential is the attention capital. And attention capital is your psychic energy that gives life to everything. This is the attention capital that gives life to the market, to the valuations in the market. Without attention capital, so let's take a Zimbabwean dollar. So with the Zimbabwean dollar, when there's less attention capital, it becomes devalued and is not worth much. But when there's a lot of attention capital concentrated in an asset, then the value increases. And what is important with attention capital, how you is important, and whether you're an artist, whether you're a politician or a visionary in terms of building empires. So you can be able to use positive means to attract the attention capital, or you can use negative means. So some politicians would use legacy, which is positive, and some people would find that scandals would be able to hook that attention capital for them. But that's one side of attention capital. How you monetize that attention capital becomes also important, because for politicians, it's about the votes, it's about having particular positions that they can be appointed to. But for the visionaries, it's a market cap. It's the dividends that they can be able to have. So it's very important to be able to monetize attention capital. And how you spend your attention capital. You can spend your attention capital to build your legacy, or you can spend to actually destroy legacies. So it's always a choice. And given that background, let's start with the ANC presidents. Now, the South African presidents are given, they have attention capital. And essentially, When you look at a presidential term, so let's assume that every president has 10 working hours per day. They have 365 days. And in those 365 days, there's a term of 5 years. So their maximum working attention capital in terms of their working hours that they can actually be able to work is 18,250 working hours per each presidential term. So that's all they have. They have hours, make a big difference. And they have to split this 18,000 hours to, one, focus on the party, secondly, focus on the state, and focusing on building legacies. So that's a limited attention. And every day that goes by, you cannot redeem your attention capital because you can't, it's a non-renewable asset. So once you've lost it, it's gone. You can't recoup it. So it becomes a precious commodity for any president to be able to conserve their attention capital and make sure that they're able to invest it in a way that can be able to build a legacy, that can be able to bring growth to the state, economic growth, and also that can enable them to hold power in the ruling party. So when we analyze a different president, President Mandela had his full term, 18,250 hours, working hours. And there was no interruption with major sicknesses and so forth. So he actually worked fully through his term. And he says, I don't want a second term. Then President Mbeki effectively took over and he spent 18,250 hours. And in his second term, because he was recalled, he only spent 15,817 working hours. And then to balance that, we had a caretaker period where President Motlanthe was able to be roped in to balance that term. And then President Zuma came in his first term and he spent the full 18,250 hours. And then in the second term, he lost more because he only spent 13,000 hours. And essentially, so President Mbeki only spent 93% of his elected time in office, and presidents only spent 88% of his elected time in office. And so when President Ramaphosa came, so he had 4,562 working hours to be able to complete that term. And in his own accord, after winning the elections in May 2019, today marks exactly 2 years that President Ramaphosa has been in his term, in his first term. Officially, this is properly his first term. So he was inaugurated on the 25th of May, 2019. So to date, President Ramaphosa has spent 7,300 hours in his job. And he's got 10,950 hours left in his term. So when we put these presidents on trial, we then asking ourselves, what did you deliver with the time that you were given? And of course, I'll lay out the dimensions that we're going to be measuring them on. And these dimensions, I'll come to them quickly, but it bears reminding everyone that we're not going to put President Ramaphosa on trial because it's like trying to eat a cake halfway through when it's still being baked. So, and it's going to cause an indigestion if you eat it when it's not fully cooked. So it's not fair to be able to do an analysis of him. But it bears reminding that at the end of the term, he's going to be put under the same scrutiny. And so he's got a vantage view of how we put the other presidents on trial. And therefore that gives him an ability to actually either, beat them by what he delivers, or he could be the worst if he doesn't deliver at the levels that they delivered at. So the jury will still be out. So when we then say the presidents have unenviable choices to invest their attention capital in. So they can either invest their attention capital in the ruling party, and what does that do? It gives them power. Or they can invest it on the state, which means that they were able to drive economic growth. or they can invest it in the Simbas. And when they invest it in the Simbas, they're going to get a legacy. So let's look at a glance, really, at the balance of how the investment took place for the various ANC presidents. So when we look at President Mandela, he really didn't spend much time at the ruling party because he already had the credentials, the stature. So he did not really cultivate the relationship in the tripartite alliance as much as he potentially could have. And therefore, you could see Labour also complaining about that they are now almost like an afterthought in certain decisions that were taken by the ruling party. But the focus for President Mandela was on the state, where he was able to then ignite some economic growth, and he did invest in the Simbas because he did appoint the Simbas, like mentioned earlier, Trevor Manuel, Tito Mboweni, and also he's planted a seed for the younger Simbas with the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund. And he said, we need to make sure that we grow our own timber. So there, he was able to cement his legacy. With President Mbeki, he also didn't really put as much time in terms of engagement with branches at the ruling party level. But this President Mbeki focused his time on the state, which is why we had beautiful economic growth during those years. We had also, he focused on putting some young cabinet ministers like Toko Diza and focus on women empowerment like Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, and which actually drove quite a lot of dividends from a BE perspective. So that was the focus of President Mbeki. And when we look at President Zuma, he invested a lot in the ruling party, and that enabled him to amass power and be able to actually be linked to the branches and feel the heartbeat of the branches. And because of the ongoing kind of trials and legal attacks, so the focus on the state was not as pronounced, but there was focus, but not as pronounced as the focus on the ruling party as the key engine for the policies that the state would adopt. And also, he had a love-hate relationship with the Simbas because he called them the clever blacks, the real rebels that sometimes are very difficult to control. There was a love relationship President Zuma and the Simbas. It had a huge impact on the Simbas in terms of building their credentials. We'll see now why. And when you look at Simbas, because there are not a lot of Simbas, so Simbas are actually an economic and a legacy asset, because with the Simbas, they spend money in the economy. They are able to come up with great ideas, and they are able to create beautiful legacies, but they're not a political asset. There is no president who win elections outright based on the numbers of the Simbas, because you still need to get the word, and you need to still be able to get people at the grassroots to be able to win power. So Simbas, in a sense, are not really a robust political asset. And so sometimes that's why, therefore, focus might not be given to them, but they build legacies and they're able to ignite economic growth, not only from their spending patterns, but also from their asset building mechanisms. So, and I'm going to explain this tool quickly because it's a very important tool to be able to measure the state of mind. This tool, actually, when I went on my honeymoon with my wife, we went to Paris. And this insight then came that actually when you're at different levels of the Paris Tower, you actually see things differently at each floor. So when we say somebody is below the ground, so their state of mind is really very gloomy, very kind of non-productive. However, when you then take that level of despair and you are able to have constructive engagement with that person, then you are able to lift them from the area of despair to the ground floor. And with the ground floor, people can see things that are positive, people can see things that are negative, but there's a ground of indifference. They're indifferent to either positive or negative. And then when you start saying, actually, you touch their heart and plant beautiful ideas and say, you know what? You can actually do this with your life and you can do this, you can get this kind of result. So you are able to then take their indifferent state and be able to inject it with positive thinking. Then that lifts them to the first floor of hope, where things are much lighter, where there's much more kind of weights that are lifted off their shoulders. But hope, hope doesn't result anything. Hope won't solve poverty, but it's a way to get there. So what happens then when you've touched the people at the heart level through positive thinking, then they're at the hope level. So hope plus a plan. So you have to engage people and construct a reality-based plan that says, okay, you are hungry. Okay, so we're going to get you a recipe. These are the ingredients that you need to be getting, or giving them a menu. This is the menu that you have. This is what you can be able to order. So hope plus a plan, which means you engage in your head, which means that you are um, very aware of the impact of the first step, the second step, and the third step. You can be able to get the faith level. So hope plus a plan gets you faith. But that's not enough. That's not going to give you food. That's not going to give you bread to eat. Faith gives you an ability to take action. So only with action will you be able to get what you want. So you need to be able to have the limbs actually doing something, taking actions with your hands. So when you have your heart aligned with the head, aligned with the hands, you're able to achieve a lot. This is very important because once you then take your faith plus action, you get to the top floor of knowing. And therefore, you know for a fact what it takes to break, to bake that bread and be able to actually then eat it because you've been able to apply the plan and you bought the ingredients and then you actually baked the bread and you get to the top floor of knowing. So you also are able to gauge the mood of the people to say, actually, what mood is the nation at? Are we at below the ground? Are we at the ground of indifference? Are we at the ground of hope? And so, for example, in America, with the election of President Obama, they moved from below the ground of despair from the Bush years and into indifference. And when uh, President Obama was elected, then there was hope, and he ran on the hope ticket. But of course, with hope, you need to have a plan and you need to have action for you to actually be able to have impact. So this is important as we then look at the different dividends that the ANC presidents have unleashed. But also the ability, when you look at the problem solving or the creativity cycle, this is very important because when you have a problem and it's a physical problem, what is the level that you're going to be able to solve the problem? You then find the technical means to solve that problem. And then when the technical means fail, you look at the legal means. And when the legal means fail, you look at the political means because now you're actually fudging it because you're then saying there's a political solution that needs to be put to this thing because there's no legal maneuvering that we can be able to have. And then ultimately, when the political solutions completely fail you, there's only one level that you can go to, at the spiritual level. So then you can solve the problem spiritually. And so this is a problem solving tool to say, this problem that I'm experiencing, is it physical? And therefore, maybe it could be resolved at the technical level. But some of the problems now that we have in this country are very political and they're not able to be resolved politically. So what is the next level that needs to be resolved? So that's where the challenge for the ruling party is today. So now when you look at, when you create something from nothing, you start from the creativity cycle when something just inspires you and you're able, it's almost like at the soul level, when there's that integrity of what you think, what you say, and what you do, that idea comes and it just doesn't want to leave you. That this is what the Simbas feel most of the time because they have beautiful ideas and they have an ability to be able to manifest those ideas. But they need to take them to the next level So yes, you can conceive your idea and dream as much as you want, but you need to be able to now convince people at a political level to have a meeting of minds to say, yes, we can be able to implement this idea, and we're able to now cement this political negotiation into a legal thing that then ensures that the idea has rule of law behind it. And ultimately, you're able to also have the technicalities of the ideas ironed out, and then the ideas come into physical manifestation. So we're going to use this as we go through these different kind of areas that we're evaluating for the ANC presidents to say what have they actually delivered. And this becomes important when we either looking from a solving of the problems perspective, where we start from this side, or when we have new ideas and they need to be given room to actually manifest. And when you go through this, you're able to also lift the mood. So this is a state of mind tool that we have created here at the VJQ Foundation. So let's also give you a little bit of the abundance architecture, because when we say we're going to transform scarcity into abundance, now this is now when we're saying we are delving at a almost like a spiritual level to be able to then say, what do we mean by that? And of course, we then borrow from the scriptures and say, okay, so how do you bring about abundance? You know, we use the story of the widow, and this is the formula that comes from there that says, firstly, there needs to be a cry. So the widow cried and said, "Man of God, my kids, my two sons, are being pursued, and myself are being pursued by creditors because my husband died. And therefore, I am experiencing some level of scarcity." And so the first step of abundance is that there needs to be a cry. With that cry, it enables the engagement with the master to able to say, okay, how can I help you? Then Elisha, in this instance, asked the widow and said, what have you got? So that's where the assets become important. What assets have you got? It could be physical, it could be mental, it could be spiritual, it doesn't matter. Everybody has got an asset. That's why when you go back to the lowest common asset that every one of us have, whether you're rich or you're poor, is attention capital. Everyone, the poorest of the poor, gets the same attention capital that Bill Gates and Warren Buffett gets. So it's how that attention capital is utilized to bring about abundance that makes a difference between being poor and actually having abundance. So first thing, the man of God said, what is the assets that you've got? And then when you have the assets, you need to have abundance vessels where you are able to use those abundance vessel to help the multiplication process to actually manifest. And then you're given a master plan. So the master plan that the widow was given was that you need to go and close yourself in the room with your sons and make sure that you then take the little asset that you have and you put it in the vessel of abundance. And in that way, so that's when you actually take the action. So you then implement this master plan, and then the multiplier process happens on its own. Then you get out of the way, and once you get outcomes, so all these vessels of abundance are filled, the fourth step is that you need to distribute it to pay back the creditors, to pay those people that you borrowed the vessels of abundance from. And then what is left over is what enables the widow and her sons to actually live in abundance. So this is the same thing when you look at the loaves and the fishes parable, the turning of water into wine. They follow the same kind of thing. So now, when we evaluate then the ANC, we're going to be looking at what are the assets that the ANC presidents have actually been able to build, and then be able to then address them on these assets, and what are the vessels of abundance that they're actually creating to make sure that those assets are actually expanding, and then what is the master plan that they have been able to build. So the first asset that we're going to then look at is transformation credentials. Now, in the transformation credentials, we're going to be then assessing three things from the ANC presidents. What is the BEE dividend that they unleashed, and how many Black people benefited from that? That's the first. Secondly, how much did they benefit themselves and their circles from that BEE dividend? And then thirdly, what is the white economic empowerment dividend that has been unleashed for white people? So that we can be able to then have a fuller picture of the transformation credentials that they have left us. So when we start off with President Mandela's BEE dividend, so really President Mandela focused more on the reconciliation. So what happened is that you had the RDP policy, which was a collective document with extensive kind of consultation that took place. And the RDP hinted at the key principles that BE should have. And at that stage, we knew it as affirmative action and so forth, borrowing from the United States. But President Mandela really focused more, because the RDP was never, policy was never really implemented in South Africa, because it was then in 96, you had GEAR coming in. So President Mandela really then focused his working hours on the reconciliation process, whereby he was able to create a reconciliation dividend for the country. And this really was important at that stage of the development of the country, because the tensions were running high. And therefore, when we look at factually, the reconciliation dividend did not contribute to the B dividend sought by Black people, but what it did, it kept violence at bay. So it stopped the country going into flames because of the focus of President Mandela in that. So some people could say, therefore, it could get an E or an F, because really the reconciliation dividend did not result in BE dividend to be captured by Black people. So I might be wrong, but for now, let's say it gets an F. Then we move on to President Mbeki. President Mbeki was really the architect of BEE in the country, and he laid the foundation for the BEE dividend, especially when we can characterize the period that President Mandela ruled in from a BEE perspective to be cowboy years of BEE. So with the Mafikeng conference, President Mbeki, and also cemented by the BMF Stellenbosch conference in 1997, sorry. And then that was followed by the 1990 Mafikeng conference, where the conference asserted that BEE must be codified. And there was a collective decision taken in the ANC that this must be the case. And President Mbeki then took charge of the process, and he was able to lay the foundation and he was a great architect of laying the foundation of the BEE dividend. So he really gets kudos for that, because he applied the resolutions of the ANC conferences, not only the 1997 one, but the 2002 Stellenbosch conference. And therefore, he laid a foundation. But though there were some loopholes, but it laid the foundation. And however, what brings this down, the grading down, is the narrowness of the beneficiaries of this BEE dividend, because it usually was flowing to people that were closer to the powers that be of the day. So that dented the impact of the dividend being unleashed. And also, of course, the loopholes does bring the grading down. So we'll say it's a C. Then we come to President Zuma. Under President Zuma, the BEE dividend was spread to many people, especially in the private sector. And we'll go into details, how did that happen? So he actually was able to get more people, Black people, to benefit from the BEE dividend that was laid, and the foundation that was laid by President Mbeki. And he also cleaned up the loopholes that were in the legislation and the different tools of transformation. And he also opened up the public sector in his first term to actually start now benefiting Black entrepreneurs and Black businesses as compared to previously, especially in the private sector, the public sector. So the conclusion is that the B dividend that President Zuma unleashed in the private sector created a greater number of multi-millionaires, Black multi-millionaires, because of the tightening and the pressure that was put on companies to empower Black people. And so, in terms of the BE dividend that President Zuma then, the grading that he would get a B plus, because a lot more people benefited, and it was actually felt. And we're going to come do the exercise when you actually meditate on this. It was actually felt by a lot more people. Because where he comes down is that in his second term, that's when things went awry in terms of very specifically public entities. And that's why I guess we do have the state capture and the Zondo Commission. But regardless of that portion, when you look at other portions where there was no state capture, the BEE dividend did flow to more Black people, more Black entrepreneurs, and also more Black professionals. It. So we have President Mandela with an F on the B dividend, President Mbeki with the C, and President Zuma with the B plus. Then we get into the benefits of BEE to the ANC presidents. So the first dimension, when we look at President Mandela, he never benefited directly from BEE deals, but his associates like Tato Motlana and his friends were able to, in the unbundling of companies between 1993 and 1998, they were able to gain a lot of BEE deals that enabled them to also support him throughout his life till he died. So President Mandela did indirectly benefit from BEE. And then when we look at President Mbeki, yes, President Mbeki's family and associate also benefited from BEE. And of course, it was narrow, but there were trickling dividends that came from the architecture that President Mbeki had put in. So it was, and we even called it narrow-based BEE because it was only focused on ownership and management, which can only help a few individuals. So that's the second element. And then when we look at President Zuma, so President Zuma never benefited from BEE in the private sector. So he stands out as the only ANC president who never benefited from BEE in the private sector, or his family in the private sector. Only later in the second term were then some benefits for some of his sons or his cousins. But when you actually look, prior to his firing in 2005, President Zuma in BD associates any of his family. We don't know why, but he didn't. And also, when you look at after he was relieved of his duty as the deputy president of the country, he was almost like relegated to a BEE Siberia, whereby no deals will actually trickle down to him or his family. And that's a reality when you look at the data. And only when he came into power could you see some of his associates maybe benefiting, but it was not also benefiting from headline deals in the same manner as the previous era was. So in a sense, you can be able to say, therefore, he did not really have the full impact of getting benefits from the private sector, because the people that control the deals would be able to then decide who gets the deals. And therefore and from the data, unless somebody has data otherwise, when you say President Zuma did benefit from BE from the private sector, either in his personal capacity or in his family or in his very close associate. So this needs to be tested and challenged. And then the last element we look at is President Mandela's white economic empowerment dividend. So you must remember that the ANC, when they came into power, they wanted to get rid of antitrust they put antitrust provisions in the Competitions Act. This antitrust legislation effectively would then take down the conglomerates to force them to sell. So that's why you had the likes of Anglo American selling some of their mining assets. You had Anglo AVI selling off some of their manufacturing and food type of assets. Because of the apartheid era and the closed nature of the economy then and the sanctions, what you found was that the excess money that was made by these companies, of course, they colluded with the apartheid government to keep the wages of black workers low, and also colluded to keep the standard of living of black people low. And that collusion led to the huge profits that they got, but they couldn't take out. So they had to find a way of investing it in the economy. So therefore, when the unbundling happened, what you found was that the Afrikaner business people were the ones who were ready to take these assets and actually build something out of them. And they had the skills of running operational businesses. But what black people did was to be passive owners. So you had these assets and nail being created, but they were buying a piecemeal of these assets on a passive basis, and on a basis that was not going to be able to yield a greater economic dividend because they were financed using banks. So the banks were able to get the interest from the dividends. And therefore, the kind of economic benefits that could flow to black people from these assets from unbundling was not as much. So in conclusion, President Mandela really provided through the unbundling, we can call it an unbundling dividend. He did empower white people. And then we go to President Mbeki. With President Mbeki, the white economic empowerment dividend was really unleashed by GEAR. So we can call it the GEAR dividend, because the GEAR dividend effectively was introduced to the ANC without due process, and the Reconstruction and Development Plan was ditched, which would have helped black people to build their economic capacity, productive skills, and to be able to create working manufacturing assets, for example. But GEAR was written by non-black economists who were not a single beneficiary in terms of BE, and there was no BE beneficiary in that process, and whereas the RDP was more collaborative. And as a result, what you find is that GEAR was not an inclusive document. It was cooked somewhere into the ANC, replacing a collective document. And the impact of that also coincided with the government employee pension fund being started in 1996. And you'll see how these things connect later on. And what that did, the GEAR dividend. So when we just then look at what impact it had. So let's say Pioneer Foods was established in 1997. And on average, they now earn 11 billion revenue. And they have a market capitalization of 21 billion, which was when the buyout offer of 24 billion from PepsiCo in the US happened. Capitec Bank started in 2001. To date, or let's say in 2019, they had 17 billion revenue with an asset base of 100 billion and a market value of 128 billion as at 21 August 2019. And then Curo, which was started in 1998 in private education with a portfolio of independent schools. They may have revenue of 2.4 billion with a market capitalization of 8.9 billion. Stadio started in 2017, 633 million in revenue and a market capitalization of 2.35 billion. And other examples like Coronation, fund management company, started in 1993 by a group of investment professionals. And around 2019, they managed 579 billion worth of assets with a market capitalization of 14 billion. And Discovery, for example, was started in 1992, listed in 1999, and the market cap in August 2019 was 69 billion. And Aspen Pharmacare was started in 1997, and they would be sitting with a market capitalization of 31 billion. So, I mean, I can go on. So it's a long list. ShopRite Checkers was not really active as much in 1994 until they got to buy OK for One brands from SAB. And that really provided them with the momentum to be the African giants they are today. So in reality then, President Mbeki was able to really create white Simbas. His gear policy gave white Simbas huge momentum. And that's how they were able to now be big entities today, because of that huge momentum, the wind behind their sail that they were given through the Mbeki years. Was it intentional? It might not have been, but the impact of it is that it did result in them getting a dividend. Then the last element of analysis, the last president to analyze would be President Jacob Zuma, white economic empowerment dividend. President Zuma did generate it through the Renewable Energy Independent Power Program. But it was different because in this one, it had conditions to say communities must have ownership. Not only ownership, that must have benefits, and you need to demonstrate the benefits, and the benefits need to actually accrue before you can actually be able to get your points. So that was a little bit of a difference. So it was really a green dividend that was definitely white people with money. They were able to benefit, but the black developers, they were able to utilize that to be able to now, I mean, there's a lot of developers in that REAP program that were able to have a foundation for their businesses, but we also had community groups benefiting. So I wouldn't say that it was huge dividend, white economic empowerment dividend, but it was a green dividend that was then almost spread across. So when we put all these elements on the first dimension of transformation credentials, what do we get? So we use the reciprocity test from the book of Give and Take by Adam Grant. And he says, you know, there's givers, there's takers, and there's matchers. So therefore, if we look at then the credentials of President Nelson Mandela, he would be probably a moderate taker because he never benefited himself directly, but he actually benefited from the BEE dividend that he did not create. That's why he could be said he's a taker, but he's a moderate taker. And then we get to President Mbeki. President Mbeki would probably be a matcher because he really did great in terms of opening up the taps of the BEE dividend. But it's like opening up the taps and saying to his associate, hey, bring your vessels of abundance here. You, hey, attack. So the others were not allowed closer to the party, and you had the same circle of people having deals after deals in their name. And also the middle class did benefit because there were some employee share schemes arising through this period, but not a lot of really, really broad-based deals. And that changed over time. And therefore, one could then say maybe President Mbeki overall contribution to this transformation credential would be on a matcher basis. And then you have President Zuma. He's the only ANC president who never benefited from BEE in the private sector. And yet he's the only president who created the biggest dividend to flow to as many people for BE. So he would be then classified as a giver without boundaries, because it's a problem to be a giver without boundaries, because so you can give and give and give, and at the end of the day you become a doormat. So sometimes it's good to set boundaries. So because some of the people that you give to will never come back and then actually say, okay, let's share some of the spoils. So it's, in essence, this might have been can be suspected to be the case, that yes, this was a precedent, especially from a B. That's why it's very careful. It's from the lens of Black economic empowerment in the private sector. So this would make him the B president who invested his soul in the game of BEE for the benefit of Black people without receiving any benefit for his efforts in the private sector. And so that's what would make him a giver. And therefore, overall, the B plus rating warrants that, because when you're a giver, when you're sold in the game, then you are able to actually show benefits for more people. And also the biggest contribution that President Zuma gave to this process, I mean, it came about, the thing we had with him was to be able to just have an introduction with the president saying, this is what the work that we're doing, early in his term. And then he challenged, he was like, Jack, hey, that's the name, Jack, Umtomnyam. I say, yeah, Boba, Umtomnyam. Say, hey, I hear you doing this BE thing. So we moved from what, broad-based, from narrow-based to broad-based. But I think there's an element that you guys are missing in this thing, because when you look at BE, actually, at true empowerment, real empowerment, and when you cover empowerment in its fullest sense, you have to start with economic empowerment. Because once you have economic empowerment, you are able to build on economic empowerment. You're able to then have proper political empowerment, because you're not going to be utilizing politics of the stomach. And then you can be able to engage on your political strategies with integrity, so that nobody could actually be able to corrupt you because of the stomach politics. So the first foundation should be economic empowerment. And therefore, once you are economically empowered, you would be able to get to and engage in political empowerment where your safety needs are addressed, where you're able to express your voice without any corruption, without any fear. And then once you have political empowerment and economic empowerment, you can be able to practice social empowerment, where you are giving to people what you are able to have, what you've been able to acquire. And you can't give to people what you don't have. And so therefore, this sequence is important. And once you have economic empowerment, political empowerment, you're able to do social empowerment much more effectively. And at the same time, you're able to keep your mental empowerment, where you develop yourself, push yourself further. And ultimately, the pinnacle of empowerment is spiritual empowerment. And once you've addressed all these items, that's when we can say you have real empowerment. That session resulted in us saying, actually, we need to put this into a picture. And this is a picture that then actually explores what real empowerment is in its dimensions. So it is not really just moving from a horizontal axis to say narrow empowerment to broad-based empowerment, economic empowerment, narrow economic empowerment and broad-based economic empowerment. It's actually going even deeper on a vertical basis to say, with this economic empowerment, there's political empowerment, there's social empowerment, there's mental empowerment, there's spiritual empowerment. And when you have empowerment in these different spheres, that's when you can really say that you've been truly empowered. So we said, hey, President, we can't actually legislate all of these other ones. So we could only be able to legislate the economic empowerment. But this actually captured the soul of what true empowerment is. And unbeknown to us, this actually is a solution to some of the problems that we're experiencing. And we'll show you how. Because now when you apply this framework, this broader view of empowerment, then you're already releasing the abundance that can be unleashed by real empowerment, by not looking at it from a narrow economic perspective. And so, in a sense, when you then look at the empowerment architecture of today, as we speak today, President Ramaphosa, in his personal capacity, contributed to the BEE Commission report of 2001, which then provided an intellectual basis and meat to the rest. So there was that beautiful contribution that is going to be celebrating 20 years this year. And an evaluation needs to be looked at, say, what has come of the BEE Commission report in terms of the intended kind of objective behind the report? Has it actually achieved what it meant to? And so, in a sense, it has, because when you then look, who are the contributors to this very robust framework? So President Mbeki contributed the political basis of empowerment. Also has a constitutional support in the Constitution of 1996. And then President Mbeki also then took the BEE strategy document, formulated the BEE Act of 2003, and that morphed into the BEE Codes of Good Practice in 2007. So that was the foundation that President Mbeki laid. And when President Zuma came, he was able to, he didn't tinker at all with the political, because this actually reflected the resolutions of the ANC in the 1997 Mafikeng Conference and in the 2002 Stellenbosch Conference. That politically was pure. Therefore, the act needed to be beefed up so that it could have more impact. So President Zuma then put more meat to the act, more meat to the B codes, but also he put different things, the physical. He made sure there was pressure for the implementation of BEE. And he said, you must report on this thing. When you have deals, you need to report the deals. You need to be able to also report what is your performance, because previously there was no requirement to do so. And then, but also the pierre de resistance of this was the true soul of empowerment based from this document. And how did he do that? By appointing the BEE commissioner. And he said the BEE commissioner needs to be able to have the aspirations of people in the ground, because they don't have expensive costs to be able to see what's happening in the deal. So therefore, the BEE commissioner effectively represents beautifully the will of the people that enables the people at the grassroots level to feel the benefits of BEE. So the biggest challenge that President Ramaphosa has now, given the strong foundation that has been laid by his predecessors, he needs to beat them. He needs to then raise the standard high. So therefore, there's a lot of pressure on him, especially remaining with the 10,950 working hours from today. That's the pressure that is on President Ramaphosa, because he needs to be able to actually elevate this stellar record from his predecessors. And he must make sure that he doesn't mess this up. So mess it up. And that's a pressure that he has. And therefore, when you look at the time left, it is indeed pressure. This is actually a very solid structure. All that is needed is pumping with action and letting more people contribute. And of course, the biggest risk is that you have COVID and you also have climate change that will be coming. However, we also need to be able to then say, I mean, there has been this saying, oh, 9 wasted years. But actually, if we have to take a proper look of what have been the wasted years, so I'm not going to really delve with the 9 wasted years kind of issue. So we need to be looking at what are the transformation credentials liabilities that have also creeped in. So we have to go back to 1994. And therefore, from a very narrow lens, I mean, I'm looking this from a BEE narrow lens, is that were there 15 wasted years of the Mbeki era around BEE? Question mark. So let's look. Between the period 93 and 2008, actually, those were, no, actually, not 2008, 1997. That was the cowboy years of the BEE period. And you had the no structure, you had free for all, and whatever you, if Black people were part of your deal structure, there was no substance that was really measured. And so what happened is that the Minister of Public Works and the Minister of Finance in 1997 had the Green Paper on Public Sector Procurement Reform in South Africa released. This is a 162-page document. And in this 162-page document is very robust because it covers how you empower Black people, how you empower SMMEs, and so forth. And therefore, however, the mishaps and the liabilities were actually created by the preferential procurement policy framework. And this was really, you know, procurement is the biggest lever to drive transformation because it is the lever that forces people to actually transform because it affects their bottom line directly. It is a business lever. That's why BEE is not a legal obligation, but a business obligation, because it's saying to the state-owned entities and organs of state, you need to use the levers of procurement, the levers of licensing, the levers of privatization, if you do that, to actually drive value for Black people. So the biggest thing that happened with this Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act of 2000, which was 2 pages. And in those 2 pages, bear in mind, you're moving from 162 page or so of a green paper on preferential procurement and to the 2 pages in the legislation. And the legislation had it that said the beneficiaries of socioeconomic factors, there was no BE mentioning of BE, is the inclusion of white women and white disabled people to benefit from government contracts. So now, if you are sitting in an organ of state and you are given to evaluate according to the triple PFA, you can't be, if the deal is 100% white women owned, you're obliged by the regulations of 2001 and the Act of 2000 to actually give them the full points on 10 because it did not specifically say there must be some level of Black elements in the socio-economic definition. So this created the biggest leakage of BEE leverage in the public sector, which is why, therefore, it could count as a wasted opportunity that could have really had a huge impact on the bottom line of Black people. And not only did this definition stifle the benefits, it therefore provided a basis when you had the mining charter and the liquids fuel charter and other legislative documents that came before the passing of the Broad-Based Act of 2003. The definition that they used was historically disadvantaged individuals, which included white women and also white disabled people. And therefore, then the subsequent legislation after this was passed had a point of reference of the definition of Black people being the triple PFA, which therefore also then limited an impact of those legislations or all those instruments to actually enable the trickle-down effect of BE to happen. It's only until really the passing of the Broad-Based Act, Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act of 2003, where it was very clear, this is a definition of Black people because the discrimination that we're looking at is not broad discrimination. We're just looking at legal discrimination that was legislated. And therefore, the people that suffered from a lack of opportunities based on legislation that prevented them to do so should be the beneficiaries of BEE. So there was that clarity in 2003. All these other acts would not be changed because now they are same level of acts, and therefore which one is going to take precedent of the other? So in essence, that became a lost opportunity from a BEE perspective. And it was only after the amendments, which we're going to come to later, that that liability was then corrected. And when you look at the financial services sector, there were also definitional issues are very important because the Financial Services Charter came in 2003 before the codes could be completed. So therefore, in their definition, they included permanent residence in the definition of Black people for board and human resources development targets, which means that you might be a permanent resident from any other part of the world, as long as you are African, Indian, or colored, then you'll still qualify when they measure their board, when they measure their employment equity, which means that then it's diluting the definition that was then contained, of course, in the 2003 Act. But because that Act was also dependent on the codes which were passed in 2007, so you had that lag of time. And also the blessing of the National Treasury to the Financial Services Charter affected their alignment to the codes of good practice. So there was this great tussle between how do you get the amendments to the charter to actually be able to be aligned to the BE codes. So that was another leakage. And I know Duma Kubule, it's his pet project and pet peeve in terms of like his disgruntlement with the Financial Services Charter. And he wrote an article, I think a week or so ago, where he was really lambasting this. So what then happened? Then when President Zuma was appointed in 2009, he then cleaned up. He then made sure that there was Preferential Procurement Policy Framework Act, regulations of 2010. When you look at the 20% and the 10%, it said it's aligning to BE. And Minister Pravin Gordhan was instrumental in making sure that these happened. And therefore, ensuring that the procurement muscle of the organs of state actually did benefit Black people. And of course, there's an argument, of course, that there was no amendment of the original act, which is why the recent ruling, in terms of the recent court case that has been brought to the, not the High Court, so yeah, above the High Court, it will come now. So the Court of Appeals, whereby they said it's inconsistent, the regulations are actually inconsistent in the act because the act was not amended. So that was an oversight in this process. However, what it did, it had a huge impact in terms of unleashing BE dividends for Black people. And the mining charter, which was having the HDI definition, was also aligned to the BE codes in 2010. The Financial Services Charter was transformed into Financial Sector Code. And therefore, they were aligned to the BE Act. So all the loopholes, all the leakages were closed. And that enabled the flow of BE to happen. And also, in 2013, the BE codes of good practice were tightened. And tougher targets said, how can you be a level 1 when you don't have Black ownership? So let's tighten this. And also, let's have sub-minimums to be able to then make sure that this thing is happening, because we're not feeling it. We're seeing the people claiming, but we don't feel it in our pockets. So that was an impact of this cleanup operation. And also, the BE Amendment Act was really, really deep, because first it said there must be a trumping provision that aligns all other acts of parliament. You can say whatever you want, but you're going to follow BE interpretation as contained in the BE Act and in the codes of good practice. So there was only one truth on BE. There can't be a financial services truth. There can't be a mining truth on BE. It is only the truth that is contained in the BE Act and the supporting codes of good practice. So they cleaned up. Then you had the BE Commissioner effectively who's like a bee ombudsman and who really would champion BEE to as many people, who'd be the counterforce to be able to bring about the beautiful balance that you see. So that was really, really an important element in strengthening, because you now have the counterparty who's able to stand for the voice of those that don't have the means to speak for themselves, who always saw the passing ropes of BE and they could not hold on to them. And then also, there were fronting provisions, which are wide in their scope, because now you sneeze against BE, we can say, hey, when you're fronter. That's how the depth of these fronting provisions are, which then makes company, of course, very careful in how they need to implement BEE, because any action that goes against the spirit of BEE could be fronting. And when it's found to be fronting, then the act also introduced fines of up to 10% of your turnover, to even 10 years imprisonment in jail if you knowingly front. So that really then cleaned up. And then also, in terms of the reporting, you had mandatory reporting of BEE transactions above a certain deal value. You had this BEE statutory reporting requirements for organs of state and JSE companies, which then ensures that, of course, the implementation of BEE in the private sector is improved. So when you look at this cleanup, it really made this framework to be really strong and effectively provides President Ramaphosa with a car that has gas. So you just need to turn on the engine, press the accelerator, and not press the brakes if he wants to be able to see the broad-based Black economic empowerment dividend really accruing to Black people. So he's got the higher task, and the toughest task, to actually make sure that this infrastructure, this transformation credential that he's been handed, is actually going to get moving. And it's actually, I mean, the biggest challenge that, of course, President Ramaphosa has is COVID-19. And of course, the bigger challenge would be climate change. And therefore, when you look at, in conclusion, on the transformation credentials, the best president on this has been President Zuma, because it actually ensured that more people, I mean, this is what data says. And I'm like, of course, I mean, I have to deal with this cognitive dissonance, because we know this version, but the data says something else. And when you actually measure your pockets, it actually also means something else. So on the transformation credentials, President Zuma runs tops. He left a beautiful legacy for the ANC, from the ANC, as an ANC president who was also listening to the branches, very linked to the grassroots. Yes, maybe he had a love-hate relationship with the Clever Blacks or the Simbas, but actually, despite that love-hate relationship, he actually benefited the Simbas more than any other presidents. He benefited the Black Simbas more than any other president since colonization. That's what you can actually, when you actually then measure that, that's the impact. He left us Simbas, Black Simbas, with transformation credentials we can be able to build on. And that is why it's incumbent upon us not to mess it up and not to allow anybody to mess with that light that is contained within this credential, because it is a credential that is going to help South Africa to actually create many pride rocks. He scores very highly on that count of transformation credentials. And I'm going to go through the green credentials, and I'm going to then take a break, and then we'll come back to also then look at others and then conclude. But when we then go to the green credentials, I think that the appropriate lens to see the bestowal of this green credential of the ANC presidents should be through the climate change resolutions at the various ANC conferences. So let's first start with 1997. Mafikeng, National Conference of the ANC. They didn't really focus on climate change. What they focused on, this was the seminal conference for economic transformation. Beautiful conference for economic transformation. And also the focus, people were angry that a year earlier, gear was introduced and the RDP was kicked out. So there was a lot of rationalizations of why gear was brought in. It wasn't convincing, and when you read the conference resolution, it was really not convincing, but you could see the rationalizations coming through. So there was nothing on climate change here. Then the 51st National Conference of the ANC in Stellenbosch in 2002. This conference really built more meat to the economic transformation framework. And at the time, the only thing that was really mentioned around climate change was the World Summit on Sustainable Development, where the wording of the resolution was to welcome the adoption of the Johannesburg WSSD plan of implementation as a minimum program to achieve sustainable development. That was it. And then under the economic transformation resolutions, the conference affirmed, we assume a collective responsibility to advance and strengthen the interdependent and mutually reinforcing pillars of sustainable development. This is beautiful. Listen to this. Economic growth, social development, and environmental protection at local, national, regional, and global levels. I mean, this is beautiful. This was a beautiful seed that was planted in 2002 at that conference. And then when you move closer to then the 2007 conference, the Polokwane conference, whereby in our Lion King analogy resulted in a change of power. So when you look at this conference, this was the high water mark of the ANC around climate change. The most iconic ANC conference on climate change actions. I couldn't believe it. Therefore, I produced that in its entirety, those resolutions. And this is like jazz music. The flow, it is so beautiful. They first start in saying, noting the ANC position on environmental issues has been consistent and is reflected in the RDP document. So that's the foundation. And then they go to say, the ANC vision has therefore sought to embrace a transformative environmentalism based upon the idea of sustainable development, which is built on the interconnection of and social and economic justice. I read this from President Biden's manifesto, but actually it was in 2007 in the ANC 52nd National Conference. So I was like, okay, wow. And then saying, acting together with other progressive forces, the ANC ensured the environmental rights were firmly entrenched in our constitution. Environmental justice is firmly entrenched as an integral part of national democratic revolution. Wow. And the ANC had played a leading role in shaping global debates on environmental justice through our participation in Rio Earth Summit, hosting the WSSD conference. And the ANC has consistently championed a progressive response to the environmental dimensions of development facing Africa and countries of the South. And therefore, in light of this, it is critical that the ANC continues to provide leadership on environmental issues and working with progressive forces in South Africa and throughout the world to ensure that environmental issues continue to receive the prominence they deserve. Wow. This is only just point number 5. Aibo. And then they go on, man. This is where they go deep and believing that our vision of the future includes a sustainable economy where all South Africans, including present and future generations, realize their right to an environment that is not harmful to their health or well-being. And therefore, in 7, we must take up the challenge of acknowledging this and act together to save tomorrow by what we do today. Wow. And then they go deep in looking at the effects and they say, there is now general agreement that the world is rapidly moving towards a point where rising temperatures will result in dramatic and irreversible climate related impacts that will have dramatic effects on human society and on our natural environment. It was years before Greta movement. Wow. And they went on. Polar ice caps are melting. Changes are taking place in the sea currents and sea levels. The hottest temperatures in recorded history have been measured in the last decade, and it's still relevant today. And as we have the most intense storms, the most destructive floods, and the longest lasting droughts. So this was almost like prophetic. And the unusual, unpredictable weather events do jeopardize human settlements, livelihoods, listen to that, livelihoods and infrastructure, especially in low-lying coastal areas. Poor communities will bear the brunt of the costs resulting from climate change in direct inverse to their contribution to the phenomenon of global warming. This is a mantra that is in the Paris Agreement. This is a mantra that is sang by President Biden. This is a mantra that is sang by President Macron. This is a mantra that is sung by the European Union. This is a mantra that is sung by Prince Charles. They sang the same thing. It was already in the 2007. Of course, yeah. And Africa continues to face the challenge of high levels of poverty, inequality, and unemployment, low levels of infrastructural development, and high reliance on primary commodities and agriculture. And this would also have water scarcity, potentially devastating effects on agricultural. All of this has come to be realized. These warnings actually manifested themselves in reality. So this was an interesting conference. And they go deeper to talk about the Benguela current and how the heat is creating the emissions is creating off, so more rain into the ocean, and that's why you have droughts. And they go into the bulk of the world greenhouse gas emissions are generated by the developed world's South Africa is responsible for 1% of the world greenhouse gas emissions, which is relatively small. And then they say, this is the reason for this is our reliance as a country on coal as the main source of energy. Therefore, this places an obligation on South Africa in fulfilling our international responsibility to demonstrate our seriousness and commitment to greenhouse gas reductions. They go on about the Kyoto Protocol, about UNFCCC, how we need to be taking responsibility. And they said in order to ensure continued growth, the supply of power will have to be doubled in the next 15 to 20 years. Coal-generated power will result in increased carbon dioxide emissions. And therefore, South Africa needs to be looking at the untapped potential for renewable energy. A shift towards renewable energy will reduce our emissions, hold substantial sustainable development benefits, including the development of sustainable livelihoods and small businesses and job creation opportunities. This is like, wow. Before resolutions came, and then the conference pronounced on the resolutions. And they resolved that there must be, we therefore resolved to recognize that climate change is a new threat on a global scale and poses an enormous burden upon South Africans and Africans as the whole, because we are the most vulnerable to the effects of climate change. The risks to the poor are the greatest. and also recognize that the evidence for climate change is indisputable. And effectively, I mean, this was in 2007, and after 2007, all the things that were pronounced here actually came to being the threats. And therefore, they resolved to set targets for the reduction of the greenhouse gas emissions, and then we're providing practical ways of then meeting that target through energy efficiency improvement in industry, in household, and by setting vehicle fuel efficiency standard, diversifying energy sources away from coal, including through nuclear energy and renewables, especially solar power. So this is where the renewable option comes in. But there's clean renewable, and there's also then there's clean nuclear energy, and then there's the renewables. And the position that Bill Gates now has said, actually, we need to be exploring clean nuclear energy, putting a price on the emissions of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. Actually, this was done by National Treasury with Minister Pravin putting the carbon tax. Look at this, allocating significant additional resources for the research, development of innovative, clean, and low carbon technologies, which has been done by the Department of Science and Technology in terms of the fuel cells for green hydrogen, exploration and development of carbon capture and storage methods, and so forth. It goes on. It goes on to say that we need to be able to have a realization of a greater contribution of renewable energy sources. And also there must be provision of incentive for investment in renewable energy and infrastructure, as well as human resources. It's not about provision of investment only in the infrastructure, but you must also develop people in the process. And also realignment of institutional mechanisms which will fast track the utilization of renewable energy. And then they say, we must move to energy efficient economy that should take regard of the imperative to create jobs. Therefore, we must have green jobs program. And wow, we must raise public awareness. We must encourage efficiency in the consumption of energy, and also integrate climate change consideration with sustainable development strategies, the science and technology agenda, integrated energy planning, transport policy, and the evolving industrial policy. And in this context, to maximize the integration of a full cost accounted economy in which the life cycle production is pursued. Sure, I'm going to stop there. But what's important is we need to continue to proactively build our capacity. So let's do this ourselves. We can't be outsourcing to people outside of South Africa. We must do this ourselves and develop a comprehensive strategy to adapt to the inevitable. It's going to happen. You can't run away. Impact of climate change, including the rollout of basic services, infrastructure planning, agriculture, biodiversity, water, resource management, and in the healthcare sector. So this is so beautifully integrated. And then to close off, their resolutions, it says environmental studies must be introduced and appreciation of nature in the school curriculum. So we mustn't leave the kids alone. So we must be able to engender the environmental consciousness in them and build partnerships between state institutions who will play their part, business, trade unions, civil society, and communities to address the challenge. This was like beautiful. And then it went further in the 53rd National Conference of the ANC in Mangaung. Under environmental protections and the green economy, a section on its own, it went into climate change. And it says we must green economy policy programs. And we have to move towards a sustainable development plan that will create new green jobs. They help to offset employment losses experienced in other sectors, open up new investment opportunities and export markets, support the creation of a knowledge-based economy. So already the fourth industrial revolution strands was coming through this conference, and allow South Africa to set standards, and most importantly, for South Africa to demonstrate thought leadership. What else do we need to be able to have the credentials, the green credentials for the Simbas? It's all laid out there. So, and then it went on climate change further. And in the Alliance Program, International Relations in Mangaung, it made it now seep through different areas and in research, development, and innovation. So I read this, and like, so when you look at the green credential struggle that we are having as the Black Simbas, these two conferences presented the high watermark, because these are standing resolutions and they are binding resolutions. So there's no need to even go to the ANC and tell them, ANC, we need your permission. No, it's already been resolved. We're just going to implement. So we can tell the ANC to inform them, this is what we are doing to actually implement these resolutions, because they are standing, and effectively as they are standing, they become the program of action for government. And they have not been annulled. And then when you look, and when you had the crisis, now using pictures, and there was this depiction of how we can be able to make sure, to avoid load shedding, we need to make sure that the demand is much lower than the supply of energy, and how that will come in. So this was now made more relatable. And this was done in 2015 as part of the social cohesion that we were in charge with in terms of arts and culture, in being able to relay the message of the energy crisis. So the last resolution was in 2017. And in 2017, there was no focus on climate change at all, other than where you saw the climate change being mentioned in the international relations with the ANC alliance partners. So, I mean, what was the big problem here in the 2017 conference was dealing with corruption. So climate change was not an issue. Transformation was not also the major issue in essence. So when we then look at then saying, okay, we looked at the lens of this from a resolution perspective. And now when we then look from a real perspective in terms of what other people are saying. So a paper written by Anton Eberhold. I mean, Anton is a doyen when it comes to the green economy stuff. He's the best mind that you can find here in South Africa, because he's got this deep experience. And what he wrote then in his paper in 2014, he said the REAP program benefited tremendously from high-level political support in the form of a relatively long history of policy statements on renewable energy. But more importantly, President Zuma's commitment to green energy during COP15 meeting in Copenhagen, and South Africa's subsequent hosting of COP17 in Durban, where the government green accord with business and other stakeholders was signed. And the question was, but hang on, South Africa was not obliged to do this. And he asks, why did South Africa proceed even though its Copenhagen offer was subject to financial assistance that has not materialized? So you say, so there was a big commitment made, but the money from international multilateral bodies to support South Africa doing this wonderful work never materialized. And so I won't go into this in a lot more detail. I'll leave a copy of this for your own consumption. But this is just taking evidence from the research done really from experts in this to be able to then take you through how this REAP program was really revolutionary, and how we actually can be able to utilize it as a foundation when we then look at the Black Simbas pushing their green credentials. And ultimately, so when we measure the money, show me the money. When we measure the money, This climate dividend of the REAP program, according to the Minerals and Energy Resources, Minerals, Resources and Energy and National Treasury in 2019 and DBSA, what they said is that the investment to the value of 209.7 billion came into the economy, and 20% was foreign investment. It created jobs. There was socioeconomic development. There was enterprise development. So these are now beautiful things that can actually be counted, trickling down to the communities, to the pockets of the communities. And we also have climate impact in terms of the carbon emission reductions. And we also had water saving. So actually, this REAP program did yield a dividend, a green dividend for all. For us to be able to build on. And now going back in the Black Lives Matter issue, the original contribution by President Zuma on what is true empowerment actually now manifests itself in the solution to Black Lives Matter. Because you see, when you say Black Lives Matter, absolutely, it talks to identity. It talks to the affirmation of the identity. But there's another side to the coin, is that Black livelihoods also matter. And now, yes, you can say Black lives that matter, but they need to be balanced by Black livelihoods for the full picture to emerge. And with that, what you then say, the Black livelihoods that matter must therefore have an economic empowerment element to it, which is what we're seeing the Black Lives Matter movement doing. And we have, it must have political empowerment elements, Black livelihoods. It must also have a element. It must also have a mental empowerment element and a spiritual empowerment element. So then, actually, when you then take Black livelihoods matter, that is reaching all these different elements, you have a solution to Black Lives Matter issues. But this is the same model that, let's have a look at gender-based violence. Black women lives matter. Therefore, if we then apply the other side of the coin, Black women livelihoods matter, especially in what mentions. For you to be able to deal with gender-based violence effectively, you need to make sure that you empower women economically, because that's a root cause why they stay in toxic relationships, because they don't have empowerment in the economic sense. So when you empower women economically, you're giving them grounding to be able to move away from toxic relationships. And therefore, when you empower women politically, therefore have their voices heard in different structures. That's how you also start changing gender-based violence. When you empower women, so girl effect is actually, you give a woman 1 rand, it has a multiplier effect. Like give a guy 1 rand, maybe 2 rands might be the multiplier, and then after that, the money moves away. But women are great multipliers of social empowerment. And then ultimately also, when you then empower women mentally to be able to have self-esteem, then you're able to then enable for them to draw boundaries, to say, no, you can't cross this boundary because you can't cross my light, you can't mess with my light. And also, when you provide spiritual empowerment to women in dealing with the scourge of GBV, you will empower them. Here's the model. And so you know, in jazz, you always improvise. So when you have a master, they give you a score and then you improvise on the score. So that's what we've done, really improvising on the score to say, actually, the substance of that contribution that President Zuma had is immense. Because you can apply this to Black livelihoods matter. You can apply this to gender-based violence. You can be able to apply to many different things. And so in essence, this is such a powerful contribution that has feet and application beyond the shores of South Africa. Because yes, there were protests on Black Lives Matter, but what South Africa is doing based on the foundation that has been given by the ANC presidents is like they were saying, okay, this is a tool that can be used to then deal with the different scourges. And in essence, if you look at the state of mind of the climate dividend, the ANC resolutions have really provided direction and grounding for us as the Black Simbas to be then able to then construct a solution. And we've constructed this solution, which we're not going to talk about today, but just to give you a sense, you need to have the soul aspects of climate change dealt with, and that will be dealt with Black Lives Matter and Black Livelihoods Matter, because those are the people that are affected the most disproportionately by climate change. In the same way we've seen COVID-19 affecting us. And of course, there is that political grounding, but we need to then be able to then have a green freedom charter that enables the voice of the people to be heard. And we need to have what I'll call the Green Marshall Plan to be able to make sure that what happened in Copenhagen cannot happen again. When people make contributions, they must actually make good on those contributions. And then we need to have a barometer that we need to measure these contributions, that they're actually creating jobs, that they're having rural wealth creation that has multiple impact on health, on agriculture, food security, energy security. And we also have the NGE, the New Green Economy 2030 program that solidifies that implementation. So in our next webinar, we're going to then take time to then unpack this, because when you actually look, the foundation of green credentials is laid out for us. All we need to do is just to act. All we need to get our political leaders to do is to say, here are the resolutions. Let's go, let's act, let's implement. Support us in implementing this, because it's your duty as the leader of the party to make sure that this program, and beautifully, President Ramaphosa has pronounced on this quite a number of times. And the ANC have Green Recovery Plan. So the key thing is that there's political grounding for being able to build break at this stage, and then we're going to come and cover free education and corruption. How do we deal with corruption? Because this is the greatest scourge that we're facing. And I think if we take like a 5-minute break so that we finish exactly at 1, and then we can be able to then continue. Okay, we're back. So we're going to just breeze through the rest and to be able to get uh, to the conclusion of this. So when we then measure the third aspect of credentials that have been created in terms of for the Black Simbas, the free education dividend. So when we look at it from the lens of what is this, what gave rise to this? You know, you had the roads must fall, the fees must fall, and currently the VETS protest early this year, which actually, if we then look what's going to happen in October, there's likely to be grumblings because that's the time when the increases are going to be announced, and that a solution for the universities needs to be presented to say the universities can't write off all these accumulated debts. So what is the solution to this? And also, I mean, fueling this is that you have climate change impacts, you have COVID-19, and and therefore the political instability that these things can induce can be actually result in this crisis, in the education crisis, which is why we then establish the Growth Catalyst Fund to be able to then say we can create a platform that can help us to address these issues. But before we then do that, so the higher education resolutions in the area, in the ANC conferences have been contained in the 52nd and the 53rd conference, where they said in Polokwane, the ANC government must progressively introduce free higher education for the poor until undergraduate level. And similarly, that was affirmed, especially for undergraduate students from poor and working class communities to be able to be covered, and the newly structured National Student Financial Aid System to be also introduced. And then, of course, there was a bombshell that was released by President Zuma on the 16th of December after the Hehe Commission. And he said, I mean, it goes on and on and on, but it actually was effective in addressing during that time. It wasn't sustainable, but it was effective in addressing the challenges of free higher education. But it was not the ultimate solution. But hidden in that was this report, this element in the Hehe report that says actually the target of 2.5% of payroll should go to bursaries for Black students at higher education institutions. And effectively, the seed of this hasn't really been fully exploited. And President Ramaphosa, in April 2019, during the caretaker period ending, after the recall of the resignation of President Zuma, this was passed. And this is the biggest asset in terms of, from a free education perspective, that can be effectively utilized to address the problem that is, we know it's coming in October. And therefore, when you then measure this, the corporate and public sector skills development spend, you could effectively raise about 45 based on the amount. So you're sitting about 1.7 trillion payroll in South Africa. And if you take 2.5% as a target, you could be sitting between 33.4 billion from the private sector up to 44 billion. And therefore, you look at this is not requiring tampering with the legislation. This requires action. This requires that political will to then say, we're going to then be able to engage constructively with companies and do this, address this before the problem manifests itself. So we're sitting on a beautiful asset here. That came from the Hair Commission. And of course, the B Commissioner had a lot of input into this. And it therefore resulted in the codes then being able to have this. And also when you look at the skills development element, it's got a sub-minimum kind of target that you need to be able to meet before you can be able to score. So this is a low-hanging fruit that can be able to address the higher education crisis. So therefore, when I do the reality check of all of this and say, okay, looking at myself, my credentials, and looking at the ANC president from President Mandela, President Mbeki, President Zuma, what impact did it have on my credentials as Vuyo Jack? So then I start and I do reality check just based on credentials and opportunities. So if I look at my academic credentials, I find that most of them took place under President Mbeki. That's why, of course, one has a mental resonance with President Mbeki, because it's like he was a president at the time when we were learning, and he was able to provide us with so much kind of insights into transformation and how it should be happening. So that's why there is that kind of mental resonance. And of course, when I became involved in the Public Sector Accounting Standards Board, that was under President Zuma. But you see, when I look at my academic credentials, earning them was under President Mbeki. When I look at my academic support credentials, me helping other Simbas to come up and rise and take their their place at Pride Rock, it was really through the era of President Mbeki. And when I look at now how I was able to establish the ground for my transformation credentials, from starting off Empowerdex, being involved in the B legislations, how I became a Simba of economic transformation was through this platform that President Mbeki provided us as young Simbas to be able to showcase our skills. And we took that opportunity, established Empowerdex, was involved in the B codes, were involved in the formulation of the various sector charters in South Africa, was even, we around 2007, 2008, got involved in the Namibian Financial Services Charter formulation. And also, I wrote a book released in 2007 that said the broad-based BEE complete guide, and the one worked for small businesses. So the foundation of my transformation credentials really happened as a result of a platform provided by the leadership of President Mbeki. Then, of course, President Zuma enabled me to now flex those transformation credentials. And President Ramaphosa, when he then became in the caretaker period, we worked in the sugar industry transformation plan. And hopefully we are now going to be looking at the zero emission facilities that can be able to integrate all these transformation, green, and education solutions and take this to the next level. So then I go to my governance credentials. Most of those, the foundation was laid through the Mbeki years. The Zuma years for me was the implementation of my governance credentials, where I was earning my stripes from a governance perspective through the Public Investment Corporation Board, Parito, Accounting Standards Board chairing, National Treasury Audit Committee chairing, JIPA, CBDA, and Africa Empowered. So, that provided exercise of the muscle and a lot of opportunities. And when looking at investment credentials, all of them without fail happened in the implementation phase when President Zuma was president. And look at my creative credentials, all of them happened under President Jacob Zuma. So then when I did a reality check, I said, did I really have more opportunities under this era or this era? What actually became very clear is like, the undeniable fact is that yes, there were opportunities mostly within the Zuma era, because now you could see the impact of the tightening of the screws, what it did for Black people. And also I would challenge people to take a mental look at their financial status through the ANC president to see how did your income change over the years, given the different presidencies? How did your balance sheet change over the years, given the different ANC presidencies? And therefore, that will then tell you on a personal basis which era had more impact on your financial status. And without even being directly involved with President Zuma, but it's just that the effect of him tightening these transformation credentials actually could be felt, not only in the business, but also personally in terms of the income. So what are the threats on the horizons now? So we got all these things that have been laid. So the threats on the horizons that, I mean, this is where reality-based kind of analysis, it's painful, but we have to still look at it. So, I mean, tomorrow it's of course, the trial of President Zuma, but also there's a constitutional crisis in the making. And this was triggered, I guess, with the Zondo Commission without necessarily going directly to High Court to force President Zuma to come through to the commission by going directly to the Constitutional Court. And because now if the Constitutional Court is wrong on that judgment and is actually jailing President Zuma, that becomes a constitutional crisis from a point of view that there's no appealable kind of mechanism to that. And also people are starting to say, what is the legitimacy of this constitution? So then I had to look and say, okay, let's look at what academics say. So there's a beautiful paper that says, because the constitution should be a social contract. So it's a paper by Dr. I think Rachel Adams that says South Africa's social contract. Wow, there was a lot to actually interestingly look at here. It says, taking the South African constitution as an eminent symbol of the South African social contract, and noting the opinion of many that the contract has failed to deliver. How? What do you mean? So she says, first, the social contract was not entirely inclusive to begin with. Wow. What does that mean? So effectively, the South African constitution was ideologically, politically, and philosophically limited from the beginning, and therefore, because of this, does not truly hold the potential to fulfill its contractual promise to transform South African society, particularly with regards to race and economic inequality. Why? Then she goes on to say, while the South African social contract was aiming to promote radical transformation, it was conditioned in advance by the constituted power that came before it. So how did this work? So effectively, the last apartheid government said these are the constitutional values that should be used to test the constitution. And therefore, if it doesn't meet this test, this constitution is not constitutional. And so then there was a constitutional test that was taken to the Constitutional Court in 96. And that first draft of the constitution was deemed unconstitutional because the court felt that it did not adequately include all the 34 constitutional principles. So the first constitution, when it got tested, was unconstitutional. Then secondly, there was one of the things that were included in there that decreed every member of the civil service is entitled to a free pension. Cool. And therefore, because of that, it wasn't constitutional. So therefore, that was removed. And that's why then, I guess in 96, you had the GPF then being able to be formed as a separate entity. And then the academics go and say that the Constitutional Assembly dream that the new constitution should incorporate the aspirations of all South Africans was undermined at the onset because the constitution was limiting the value and legitimacy of indigenous and customary law, and also by the attempt to include guarantee on pensions, it therefore constrained the ideals. Wow. And also because it was also well in terms of the canvassing of opinions, but they were not obliged to take those opinions of the people because the final test, and she says it in this thing, it was not legally obliged to include the people's submissions in the final constitutions in the same way that it was obliged to include the constitutional principles that had been adopted by the apartheid era parliament. Wow. So effectively, this constitution had to meet the requirements of the people that were responsible for apartheid. Yo, okay? You read these things like saying, but what? And then another limitation, there was a lack of a constitutionally enshrined right to work, because this is not in line with international human rights law. Okay. And of course, the property rights was a problem. That's why we're having this amendment of the constitution engagements happening. And also, uh, effectively, what becomes the academics' view is that this constitution was not a revolutionary clean slate, because it was conditioned in advance by the constituted power of the old apartheid order. Wow. And the power was manifested in the protections to property rights and white minority businesses, which were subsequently bestowed with the task of realizing the key dividend of the social contract, which is job creation. So in essence, the making that needs to be actually effectively dealt with by the leaders. And then another paper that says how the greatest heist from government coffers being the private affairs of public pension in South Africa, which is debt development and corporatization by of its rule. The apartheid government actually changed from contributory pension system to the one that is defined benefits, fully funded. So in order to do this, say in 1989, the total debt of the South African government stood at 68 billion rands, of which 66 billion was domestic debt, and only 12 was foreign debt. And then by 1996, this debt grew to 308 billion, 297 domestic, 11 billion foreign. And at the same time, the assets of the GEPF grew from 31 billion to 136 billion. So in essence, effectively, is government then putting money into the pension fund that ultimately is managed by the PIC, that ultimately invested in the private sector. So that's why, therefore, you're able to see the momentum that is created in the creation of the white symbols. So in essence, it's effectively saying, this money actually helped fuel the waves of white empowerment. And the commitment that was supposed to be there in terms of development. This costly transition had detrimental implications for social investment, especially in the areas of education, health, and welfare. So what this shows is that there needs to be something that helps the Black Simbas to be able to rise. And the GPF plays a big role in being able to do that, because then government has to be able to balance these two, to be able to say, yes, we need to deal with the extent of inequality in terms of differentiating between the rich and poor, but also make sure that there's a distribution that is all more urgent. So this is quite telling from a GPF perspective for Advocate Bezos, who said in his book, "No One to Blame in Pursuit of Justice in South Africa." Certainly, big apartheid bureaucrats like director generals and other highly paid members of the civil service have been given their golden handshakes and early retirement packages. And the apartheid criminals, many responsible for death squads, have taken early retirement on full pensions. So we had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and that was then forgiven, and they were actually paid off. And then, what is the conclusion? So when you look at the trials and tribulations of President Zuma, effectively saying that, yes, in the greater scheme of things, he has a case to answer for. But people are asking a question which, like, is difficult to answer. It was easy for the Mufasa ANC leaders to reward their oppressors with lucrative pensions and other dividends. And yet, it is difficult for them to forgive and take care of the president who delivered dividends for black people and the party. So therefore, how do you deal with this issue of corruption effectively? Because this position that now this president, he finds himself, is like the ropes came and helped the people at the top to be extracted from the well of economic oblivion. But as he feels effectively left behind in this well of economic oblivion, while having helped black dividend to accrue, climate accrue, and also higher education dividend. And, and therefore, it forces us to think then, how do we then resolve this issue of corruption in an effective way? When you go back to the Freedom Charter, and I guess dealing with this constitutional crisis, it becomes very important. Let's quote it. The Freedom Charter says, "No one shall be imprisoned, deported, or restricted without a fair trial. And imprisonment shall only be for serious crimes against the people and shall aim at re-education, not vengeance." So the Freedom Charter is like, this is deep and is forcing us. So when you apply the reality-based analysis in terms of looking at it from a 365 degrees, this presents a problem. And so how do you deal with corruption generally? And we go to the book called Prosperity Paradox that says, nobody wakes up to be corrupt generally. So, and you have different stages of corruption. So the first stage is things are very unpredictable. And so therefore they are very overt and unpredictable. Whereas in the second stage, it is covert and predictable corruption. So you can actually be able to price it. But this is also very difficult to be able to deal with this corruption because why do people hire corruption? Firstly, they want to make progress from being poor to being well off. Secondly, they have a cost structure where their income is much lower than their cost. So what does it do? It leaves a gap for corruption to play. So therefore, to deal with the roots of corruption, we need to be able to think differently, to be able to say, how do we eradicate the scourge of corruption from South Africa? And this book provides beautiful analogy and actually framework. It says, development precedes successful anti-corruption programs because no one wakes up to be corrupt as a human being. And therefore, the more wealth to the people and progress in life, it makes hiring corruption less appealing. So, what is the solution? You need to give people a chance to create wealth and make a living using market creating innovations. That's where disruptive innovation comes in. So that's where now, when we put all of these factors together and saying, how are we going to deal decisively with corruption? Because if you deal with corruption without providing a chance to create wealth, without driving economic growth, you're going to lose. And essentially, therefore, what is the dividends that we have at our disposals today? We have the transformation dividend that can help us to create our transformation credentials. Secondly, we have the climate change dividends that we can be able to build on in order to be able to then create new green economy. And then thirdly, we have the free education dividend that be able to be utilized by the Simbas to actually come up with proactive solutions that will deal with corruption. And therefore, if we are able to then give people a chance to create that wealth, and slowly and surely we will be addressing the economic empowerment pillar of true empowerment. And through that, we could therefore be able to start moving the need in dealing with with corruption effectively. Because if you have new anti-corruption laws, and they won't work without effective enforcement. And also, why are people reluctant sometimes to be able to apply that? Because it's politically costly when you do apply those enforcements sometimes. So therefore, in order to deal with the impasse, we need to be able to then say, what development can we be able to lead as the Black Simbas? Because we need to avoid a situation whereby we leave people in this well of economic oblivion. So, and also when we evaluate ourselves now, according to corruption in different levels manifests itself in different levels. It can manifest itself in economic terms, in political terms, in social terms, mental terms, and spiritual terms. So when we then truthfully, realistically measure ourselves and say that we have no corruption whatsoever, economically, politically, socially, mentally, and spiritually, what are you going to find? Sometimes most of us, if not all of us, have small skeletons that we do have some level of corruption. And what is critical is the scale of corruption that needs to be minimized. And therefore, radical transparency becomes a big tonic for actually dealing with corruption. And actually, when we have now to evaluate ourselves honestly and say, what corruption I might be involved with, either overtly or covertly, either in economic, political, social, mental, and spiritual levels, then I think most of us will be found wanting. So what becomes then important is then how do we transcend this lack of integrity? And that's where we then go and look at helping people to be able to have balance sheet affluence. And the programs that we can be able to come that does not enable people to earn FU money, because that's a corruption buster and a legacy build. Bear with me. What am I saying about this? So when you actually unpack what FU money is, it's got different layers. You have at the apprentice level where people are dealing with hygiene factors. So this is where corruption really finds itself. And therefore, can we be able to be resolving those income statement struggles? What is the income statement struggle? I have costs that are much higher than the income that I have. So how, as a Black Simba, are you going to be able to contribute in dealing with that? So we need to be able to then have value creation tools. So such as using the green credentials, building our green credentials in a way that creates jobs. Because then what you do, you're enabling people to earn money and you make it difficult to hire corruption. So that becomes our obligation and contributions in dealing with corruption. And then also that helps to deal with hygiene factors. So imagine then when you empower the Black Simbas to create jobs, to create their pride rocks, what are you going to find? You're going to find that when you create green jobs, that will deal with factors that brings down that increases the income that people have. Then you make corruption not to be hired as a solution. And that is why I started on with this journey of the Simbas to say, how do we empower Simbas? The most Simbas, Black Simbas that we empower, that are going to be able to have businesses across the board at the rural areas, on the JSE, in the townships. What do you do to corruption? You actually make it less appealing because we are developing their capacity to earn. So then the next level, once people have dealt with the income statement struggle, then the next level, when people are professional, then they worry about balance sheet struggles to say, how do I now increase my balance sheet? That is why the Black Simbas are financially fragile, is because they've never had an ability to build a balance sheet. Why? The situation and the environment in this country has not been conducive for them to be able to build this balance sheet. And therefore, the powers that be need to understand then to remove those barriers for the Black Simbas to be able to build their balance sheet. And how do you do that? By allowing them to then capture the value they create. Let me tell you, Simbas create a lot of value, but they don't capture the value. So if you continue working for somebody, you are creating value for somebody else, not for you. And therefore, the Black Simbas need to be the ones running their own businesses. You can't be running 20%, 26% of somebody else's business. That 26% of a business to be owned. No, that's not the best ideal. So we need to create businesses that are more than 51% that are going to be run by these Simbas. And in that way, they are able to deal with the balance sheet struggles. And the more balance sheets affluence you create for the Black Simbas, the less ability of them wanting to be corrupt or be able to engage in any corrupt activities that is going to affect their balance sheets. Then the last level is when you are now a master. That's when you have philanthropy struggles because you've dealt with your balance sheet. You have a solid balance sheet and you want to now build a legacy. So you worry about legacy factors. That's why you worry about the value circulation tools. Do I create an endowment in universities that can be able to empower other people? Do I create museums? Do I leave my money to philanthropy? And what are the areas of philanthropy that I should be considering? And therefore, that requires the use of value circulation tools to be at work. So in essence, by using the foundation that has been left by the ANC presidents over the years in terms of transformation, in terms of the green dividend and the green credentials and the education crisis and the right support, because now we have President Ramaphosa with 10,950 hours left for him to work with the Black Simbas to then be able to create this FU money levels that will then provide a solution to corruption. You see, you will never bust corruption without giving an alternative. And the Black Simbas, when you empower them, when you give them the autonomy to run their businesses and build balance sheets, they increase the income levels of people that are going to be employed. And they are able to attract investments because we're looking at the green dividend, and that investment doesn't have to come from South Africa. There's money international they can actually be able to use to do that. Then you start dealing with corruption very decisively. But what is it really going to take? It's going to take our leaders to then roll their sleeves and work with the Black Simbas so that in this remaining first term of 10,950 working hours, we can be able to see a beautiful, different pride rocks emerging. And if we don't do that, all these crises around the constitution, around GF and so forth, in not being able to create social impact in the investments, and also the corruption that is going to affect the body politic of this country. If we don't create pride rocks for the Black Simbas, I can tell you for free, the corruption, the fight against corruption will never be won. And therefore, what we need to be able to do, we need to help the Black Simbas to start and grow. And when they mature, they can be able to redream and be able to create new industries. And our legacies are built. And if we don't, we are here now at the mature level. It's either we have a decline, and therefore, and if we try to pursue rule of law with a vengeance, not a re-education. This is what's going to be happening. Instead of taking the hardest step of redreaming this thing, going back now to the abundance architecture, what assets do we have to be able to redream this and be able to build Pride Rocks that are balance sheet affluent? And it's not going to be easy, because what it does when you dream, you're going to have to take a leap. And I guess I've taken a leap initially in 2001, and I'm taking another leap. As a Rafiki, I'm taking a leap, and I'm standing for the Simbas, for the Black Simbas, and unapologetically so. I'm standing up for the Black Simbas, because actually, when I look and scan around, there's not many people that are standing up for Black Simbas, but I'm standing up for these Black Simbas, because these are the Black Simbas that are really going to be able to restore pride in South Africa, that are going to be able to generate energy security, that are going to be able to generate job security, that are going to be able to create great antidotes against corruption. And therefore, when you take a jump, you're going to always have a fight. Yes, I'm going to be attacked after this thing. When I vote you papa, yeah, why is Okulma so? I don't know. But as a Rafiki, I don't care. Because ultimately, the end picture is such that the more Black Simbas we create, we are able to create beautiful eras of abundance. And when we create the beautiful eras of abundance underpinned by these Simbas that are not interfered with, we don't want the Simbas to have other people imposed on them, because when you impose something from outside that is not cooked within inside, it causes an indigestion. And we've seen politically, when things are introduced from outside, they create a leakage and cause an indigestion and send people off course. So the lessons we've learned from putting the ANC presidents on trial, rather than actually having a negative outcome, actually you have a feel-good factor to be able to say, actually, they did deliver something that addresses our credential struggle. And it's incumbent upon the current leadership to build on those assets that we've got. And they must be vessels of abundance in order to be able to make those assets to grow. And also, they have to follow a master plan of creating value in the economy. Because you see, somebody says, well, persecuting this president resulting in economic growth. No, actually what we're doing. So yeah, we're going to focus a lot of attention on the Zuma trials. And the attention capital is then going down, going down, going down. I choose not to focus on that. I choose to build. Use my remaining attention capital that I have to actually build. And who am I going to invest in? I'm going to invest in the Black Simbas, because I've worked with them. And actually, they are so beautiful. They are cowards, of course, because they're scared. Hey, if I rise, I'm going to be hit by the hyenas and they're going to bring me down. So I'm going to take a hit on their behalf. So I'm going to be like putting, my soul on the line. But, it's a beautiful soul to put on the line, because I know what they can deliver. And starting from today, that's why this is called the road to COP26, whereby we can now unleash our master plans with the Black Simbas, where we're going to be able to showcase their beautiful talent, whereby we want to engage with the political leaders. We want to engage with business leaders. Don't be scared of us. We're Black Simbas. We go direction. And we're going to challenge you. We're not going to just take things that you give to us and say, yeah, and give it deference. No. When you apply the truth, there's only one truth. And this truth is very clear. When you don't invest in Simbas, this country will never have economic growth that is going to be widely distributed. And therefore, I stand with the Simbas. And what is important, though, is that the Simbas must put their skin and soul in the game. So this is an important element. Once you have that, you're able to then also base it on meritocracy. I showed you those credentials. Everything can be actually validated. So the credentials of the Simbas must be validated based on meritocracy, so that when we support the Simbas, we're supporting people that have the absolute skills to deliver what we need, to deliver jobs, to deliver economic prosperity, and to be able to deliver the ability to have energy security, food security, water security. And that can be done by the Black Simbas, not only exclusively by them, but this is what's missing in this country, those Black Simbas to actually rise, to create role models for the younger people coming through. That's why education credentials, high education credentials are important, because they create role models for younger generations to say, oh, here's the Simba that I can look up to. Who are we looking as our role models? I'm not going to disown anyone, so I'm going to leave it. But I can tell you now, the role models that I want to look up to are people who build their businesses from scratch, people who've earned their scars and their stripes, people who've been able to move the needle, people who can be, when I speak to them, they have that gravitas and substance that enables them to say, I built this. And that's the same thing. So meritocracy across the different areas, economy, politics, social, mental, and spiritual are very important. And radical transparency, that's courageous conversations right now. It's part of an exercise in radical transparency. And we're going to be engaging from tomorrow onwards on different actions that are able to help the Simbas get the platform to be able to be assisted and to allow their light to shine. And that's part of the continuous education element as well, that helps their growth credentials and current is that skin and soul in the game. So what is the skin in the game and the soul in the game that they're investing in? And the meritocracy is important. Radical transparency is important. Continuous education. And then I started then my presentation and I left it at this juncture that said, we're going back to the Lion King and then say, given these characteristics, now at the end, what are the characters that we end up with? So do we have Mufasas? Do we have Scars? And we have Simbas. So I leave it up to you. I'm going to put this presentation up on my website later today. And then we're saying, when you now, given what I've spoken about here today, what are the characters that we're currently dealing with? Who are the Mufasas? Who are the Scars? And who are the Simbas? And ultimately, the answer is very surprising, actually, when you now apply this at a deeper spiritual level, because people that you think are scars might not be scars, actually. People that are you didn't think is scars actually might be scars. So it confuses the hell out of everybody. But the biggest message is that we're going to be having a series of engagements, courageous conversations, to be able to call a spade, because when you don't do that, our integrity, what we think, what we say, and what we do are not going to be aligned, and therefore we will never be able to deal with the catastrophes that faces us: COVID-19, climate change, and lack of economic growth. And my considered view is that when you empower the Black Simbas, that's why I'm investing in Simbas, is that that's where the answer to the problems of the country. So we need to then engage President Ramaphosa and his cabinet and the different political leaders to be able to then say, how do we help the Simbas to rise? We should measure now in this 10,950 working hours that this administration has. They should be measured in saying, how many Black Simbas have they been able to create, and the pride rocks they've been able to create, and that is visible in the rural areas. Something can touch and see. And that's how we're going to be able to deal with corruption. So I've run out of time. So I'm gonna call it quits now, and because we have to cut the discussion. And so be on the lookout. We're going to then be having different engagements, and we're going to be taking particular actions in support of the Simbas. And that's the obligation, me as a Rafiki, taking the baton, the proverbial baton from Archbishop Tutu to say, this is what I want to be able to contribute as part of my legacy. As a Simba of economic transformation, then I need to also be the Rafiki of inner transformation that helps unleash the potential of the Black Simbas. So on that note, thank you very much. I know it's been me almost like ranting. And so the conclusion of the webinar is now, and it will be available on YouTube and also the links on the website. Now, what I will make available on the website is the full presentation where I took the ANC president's task, and I hope that they're not going to be too harsh on me for being so frank. But at least we hope that also President Ramaphosa can be able to take, some bit of a leaf, because that's what we're going to subject him to at the end of his tenure, and hope that in this remaining time that he will be able to earn a return on investment for Black Simbas, and be able to also then decisively deal with corruption based on the actual developing of the Black Simbas and increasing the incomes of the people at the grassroots level. On that, thank you for giving me the attention and really for bearing with me telling this whole long story. And on that note, au revoir.